Hello and welcome once again to Red Gaming Tech. My name is Amar. So today is the 11th of October and I'm here to give you yet more of your daily gaming news, this time from Capcom. This is a little bit of a rumour, I feel, as it hasn't actually been officially confirmed, but Resident Evil 7 has been spotted on a costume designer's resume, which could mean that it's actually in development currently and could even have been in development since November last year. Now, Capcom working on a new Resident Evil title should surprise no one ever, since it's one of their longest running franchises, and of course they did say that they would be continuing the series despite the rather abysmal sales and of course feedback concerning Resident Evil 6, and of course Resident Evil 5 wasn't exactly well received either, at least not in my opinion. Now, of course, they did come out and say after the sales and all that came in for Resident Evil 6 that they would be taking it back in the direction of its roots of survival horror. Now, a House of Moves costume designer who goes by the name of Karen Breckenridge has updated her LinkedIn profile to indicate that she is working on Resident Evil 7. Now, interestingly, the date posted was November 2012 to January 2013, which does indicate that the game began development literally as soon as Resident Evil 6 had released. So you do have to wonder what direction Capcom started to take before the reviews and sales data actually came in, because they could have started out making a game as if it was going to be a successor to Resident Evil 6 in the sense of having the same sort of very action-focused gameplay with not much horror thrown in, and then they got the sales data and of course the reactions and reviews for Resident Evil 6, and then of course they were like, oh, okay, we need to do something about how the series is performing, let's take it back to its survival horror roots. So does that mean that they started again from scratch, or does it mean that they simply have to incorporate what they'd already done up until that point into the final game? Perhaps we'll be seeing that as a separate character section, as we did with Resident Evil 6 with having separate characters with separate campaign stories. That's certainly possible, as of course we don't know how much development was actually made before they actually sat down and read the reviews and all the rest of it. Now, aside from costume designing, House of Moves is known for its motion capture, cleanup, targeting, facial and secondary animation, and comes highly recommended from studios such as Epic Games, who hired them for Gears of War 3. So it's a possibility that Resident Evil will be straight to next-gen consoles, which wouldn't really surprise me, given that we haven't even had an official confirmation from Capcom regarding a Resident Evil 7 sequel. I would imagine that when it does come out, it will be a PS4, Xbox One and PC title, as of course Resident Evil as a series has been for a while, a multi-platform release, so I'd be very surprised to see it come out on current gen hardware, as of course it will not be coming out for quite some time, as we do not even have a official confirmation from Capcom at the time of recording. So what does this actually mean? Well, of course, that depends on how true it is. Now, if she was just working on it for motion capture purposes, then it is of course possible that they were able to still use the assets that the House of Moves gave them, and of course took Resident Evil in its new direction, well, old direction should I say, back towards the traditional survival horror that made the series great. Now, I'm sure we'd all love to see a Resident Evil 7 that is more like Resident Evil 4 in terms of its direction. Now, Resident Evil 4 was still a departure from how it did it originally in Resident Evils 1, 2 and 3, and of course Code Veronica as well. But it was still a very, very good game filled with lots of tense and panicky moments, and while it wasn't what I personally would call scary, it was a very fun, very interesting and gripping game that had some genuinely tense moments and some genuinely panicky moments, and is still one of my favourite PS2 games to this day. And of course Resident Evil 5 and 6 are probably going to go down as the two worst Resident Evil games of all time, and Resident Evil 6 is probably going to be the worst for quite some time. So hopefully this means that we're going to be seeing an official confirmation from Capcom soon. What concerns me though is that she's listed it from pretty much the date that Resident Evil 6 actually came out. So they might have started development on Resident Evil 7 before the feedback actually came in, or they might have just got her in to actually just as a sort of preliminary thing at the start to work things out, sort things out, and all that good stuff. We don't actually know how much work she was doing for them at the start. Of course, she doesn't list that kind of information publicly. So it's really, really tough to say. Personally, I hope that they didn't do too much development before the sales figures, reviews, and all that actually came in from Resident Evil 6, as of course we had various statements from various high-ups in Capcom that they would be taking it back to its survival horror roots, and I'm just praying to the horror gods that they do just that. Resident Evil used to be one of my favourite series. Resident Evil 2 was one of my first games that I just really fell in love with, and one of the series that I just really got into when I was quite young. Of course, I played, Sonic and Streets of Rage and all of that when I was really young, but I'm talking about the first, as a older teenager when I just fell in love with that game, and it all went from there. So I want to see the series go back to its former glory, but is there really much chance of that? Well, that remains to be seen. I'm just sure we're all sitting here and hoping that Capcom have learned their lessons from Resident Evil 6's reception, because Resident Evil 5 apparently didn't teach them anything. So hopefully they are going to stick to their guns and actually go back to how things used to be and get rid of all this action-adventure nonsense that doesn't really belong in a Resident Evil game. Anyway, that is me done for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.